The scent of betrayal is sharper than any perfume. For Amelia, it smelled like her husband's expensive Tom Ford cologne, mingled with the cheap cherry blossom perfume her cousin always wore. It was a scent she discovered in her own bed, on sheets she had picked out in the multi-million-dollar penthouse that was supposed to be their sanctuary. She was 6 months pregnant with their miracle baby, the one they had prayed for, cried for, and celebrated. But as she stood in the doorway, the illusion of her perfect life shattered into a million pieces. He wasn't just a cheat. He was a monster. And she didn't just walk away. She vanished, leaving behind nothing but a ghost and a promise of silent revenge. Amelia lived a life most people only read about in glossy magazines. Her husband, Julian Croft, was a titan of industry, a man whose name was synonymous with success in the cutthroat world of international finance. Their home was a sprawling penthouse on the 80th floor of the iconic 157 building in New York City, a glass palace with panoramic views of Central Park that stretched to the horizon. Every morning, she woke up in a bed with sheets of the finest Egyptian cotton, the city's golden hour light filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a life meticulously curated for perfection. Julian was charming, devastatingly handsome, and outwardly utterly devoted to her. He showered her with gifts, a vintage Cartier watch 1 week, a surprise trip to the Amalfi Coast the next. He would whisper sweet nothings in her ear, his voice a low, reassuring rumble that always made her feel safe. He called her his North Star, the anchor in his tumultuous world. They were the golden couple, the envy of their elite social circle. Their joy had reached its zenith 6 months ago, when after years of heartbreaking fertility struggles, Amelia discovered she was pregnant. It was a miracle, a precious gift they had both ardently wished for. Julian seemed overjoyed. He had the nursery designed by a famed interior decorator, filled with handcrafted wooden toys and clothes from Bon Point. He would often kneel, pressing his ear to her burgeoning belly, speaking to their unborn son, promising him the world. To Amelia, these moments were proof of their unshakable bond. Her cousin Isabella had been a constant presence in their lives. After a string of bad luck, a lost job, a broken lease, Amelia had persuaded a hesitant Julian to let Isabella stay with them just for a few weeks, until she got back on her feet. Isabella was the wild one, a stark contrast to Amelia's composed grace. Where Amelia was classic Chanel, Isabella was fast fashion and fleeting trends. She was always a little too loud, her laughter a little too forced, her compliments for Julian a little too effusive. Amelia, ever the trusting and kind-hearted soul, dismissed her own fleeting moments of unease. She told herself she was being overly sensitive, perhaps due to the pregnancy hormones. When Isabella would accidentally walk into their bedroom while Julian was dressing or laugh a little too long at his jokes, Amelia would bite back the flicker of irritation. She was family after all, and family in Amelia's world was everything. The day it all came crashing down was a Tuesday. It was their 3rd wedding anniversary. Julian had told her he had an early, unavoidable meeting with international investors, but had promised a lavish dinner at Per Se that evening to celebrate. He'd kissed her goodbye, his hand lingering on her belly, a picture of doting husband and father-to-be. Amelia had a routine prenatal checkup that morning. The doctor's visit was perfect. Their baby boy was healthy and strong. Floating on a cloud of maternal bliss, she decided to surprise Julian at his office with his favorite lunch, a lobster roll from the little place he loved in Soho. She wanted to see the look on his face to share her joy. But when she arrived at Croft Holdings, a gleaming tower of steel and glass in the heart of the financial district, his longtime assistant, a stern but loyal woman named Margaret, looked flustered. "Mrs. Croft, I wasn't expecting you," Margaret stammered, her eyes darting nervously towards the elevator. "Mr. Croft is in a very important meeting. He left strict instructions not to be disturbed." "Oh, it's all right, Margaret," Amelia said with a warm smile, holding up the takeout bag. "I won't be a moment. I just wanted to drop this off for him. He's been working so hard." "Perhaps I can take it to him." Margaret offered a bead of sweat on her temple. Amelia's brow furrowed slightly. Margaret's behavior was uncharacteristically odd. "No, it's fine. I'll just leave it on his desk. He won't even know I was here." Brushing past the flustered assistant, Amelia took the private elevator to the top floor, a keycard Julian had given her, granting her exclusive access. The doors opened to a silent, opulent reception area that led to his private office. The large, imposing oak doors were slightly ajar. She pushed the door open gently, a cheerful surprise on her lips. But the word died in her throat. The scene that unfolded before her was a grotesque tableau of betrayal. The lobster roll fell from her hand, its contents spilling onto the plush, cream-colored carpet. There on the massive mahogany desk, the one where he signed billion-dollar deals, was her husband. And tangled with him, her dress hiked up around her waist, was Isabella. Their heads snapped towards the door, their faces a mask of shock and guilt. Julian's eyes, the same eyes that had looked at her with such adoration just hours before, were wide with panic. Isabella, her lipstick smeared, let out a pathetic whimper, scrambling to pull her dress down. The world tilted on its axis. The air was sucked from Amelia's lungs. The only sound she could hear was a deafening, high-pitched ringing in her ears. She saw the details with a horrifying clarity, the way Isabella's cheap, cherry-scented perfume hung heavy in the air, a sickly sweet stench that made her stomach churn. The way Julian's hand was still tangled in her cousin's hair. The half-empty bottle of champagne on the corner of the desk. Amelia didn't scream. She didn't cry. A strange glacial calm washed over her, freezing the very marrow in her bones. She looked at Julian, her gaze so empty it was terrifying. She saw him not as her husband, but as a stranger, a loathsome creature she didn't recognize. "Amelia, baby, it's not what it looks like." Julian began, his voice hoarse, as he fumbled with his clothes. The cliché was so absurd, so insulting, that a single mirthless laugh escaped her lips. It was a broken sound, sharp and brittle. She didn't spare a glance for her whimpering cousin cowering in the corner. Her focus was solely on the man who had just ripped her world apart. She took in the scene one last time, branding it into her memory. The overturned photos on his desk. Photos of their wedding, of their travels, of her, seemed to mock her. Then, without a single word, she turned around. She didn't stumble. She didn't run. She walked. Her back was ramrod straight, her head held high. Each step was deliberate, measured, taking her further away from the wreckage of her life. She walked past the horrified face of Margaret in the reception area, through the lobby, filled with his employees, and out onto the bustling streets of New York. She walked away without looking back, the ghost of her past life already fading behind her. She had nothing but the clothes on her back and the tiny, innocent life growing inside her. And in that moment of absolute devastation, a spark of something new and fierce ignited within her, the will to survive. The city noise was a dull roar, a chaotic symphony that barely registered. Amelia walked for blocks, her mind a blizzard of white noise and searing images. The city that had once felt like her kingdom now seemed alien and hostile. Every smiling couple, every advertisement for a happy family was a fresh stab to her heart. She found herself standing in front of the New York Public Library, its stone lions, standing sentinel silent witnesses to her world's collapse. She sank onto a cold stone bench, the chill seeping into her bones. The glacial calm that had carried her out of Julian's office began to crack, and a deep, shuddering tremor took over her body. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the sheer depravity of it. Her husband, her cousin, in his office, on their anniversary, while she was at a doctor's appointment for their child. The layers of deceit were suffocating. Her phone began to buzz incessantly in her pocket. Julian flashed on the screen again and again. Dozens of calls. Then the texts started pouring in. "Amelia, please, baby, come back. We need to talk. It was a mistake, a stupid, unforgivable mistake." "Let me explain. Isabella means nothing to me. You and the baby are my world. Don't do this, Amelia. Don't throw everything away." Each message was a fresh wave of nausea. He spoke of their life as if it were a misplaced object, something that could be tidied up and put back on the shelf. He didn't understand. He had not just broken a promise. He had incinerated the very foundation of their existence. With trembling fingers, she blocked his number. Then she blocked Isabella's. Her next call was to her older brother Marcus, a quiet, steady presence in her life. He was a history professor at Columbia, a man who lived in a world of books and facts, a world away from the glitz and glamour she had inhabited. "Marcus." Her voice was a fragile whisper, a sound she barely recognized as her own. "Amy." "What's wrong? You sound terrible." The dam broke. Sobs racked her body, great gulping breaths of grief and rage. Between broken sentences, she managed to tell him everything. Marcus listened patiently, his silence a comforting balm. There was no judgment, no "I told you so," though he had never been Julian's biggest fan, always finding him a little too polished, a little too smooth. "Where are you, Amy?" he asked, his voice firm, grounding her. "The library on 5th Avenue. Don't move. I'll be there in 20 minutes. True to his word, Marcus arrived his familiar, slightly rumpled figure a beacon of safety. He wrapped her in a hug and she buried her face in his tweed jacket, the scent of old paper and pipe tobacco, a comforting anchor to a time before Julian. "We need to get you out of the city," he said, his tone decisive. "He'll look for you at my place first." Amelia nodded numbly. The thought of returning to the penthouse to their bed was repulsive. Every object, every memory, was now tainted. She needed to disappear. "There's a legal instrument," Marcus said, his professor's mind already analyzing the situation. "It's called a post-nuptial agreement. Did you ever sign one?" Amelia shook her head. "No, Julian said it was unromantic. He said what was his was mine always." Another lie, another piece of the carefully constructed facade. Good Marcus said, a grim look on his face. "That makes things more complicated for him. But Amy, you need to understand, a man like Julian with his resources, he won't let you go easily. Not because he loves you, but because a messy divorce and a public scandal are bad for his brand. He'll try to control the narrative." They went to a bank where Amelia, to her own surprise, had a private account her late grandmother had set up for her years ago. It wasn't a fortune not by Julian's standards, but it was enough to start over. She withdrew a substantial amount of cash, a shield for the immediate future. Her next move was a testament to the quiet strength she never knew she possessed. While Marcus waited in a rented car, Amelia, cloaked in a scarf and sunglasses borrowed from a pharmacy, did the unthinkable. She went back. She used her key to enter the service elevator of 157, a route she knew the staff used for deliveries. The penthouse was cavernously silent. A wave of dizziness washed over her as she stepped inside. The air still held a faint, cloying trace of cherry blossom. Her stomach roiled. She moved with a singular purpose, a ghost in her own home. She ignored the designer clothes, the jewel-encrusted handbags, the vault containing millions in jewelry Julian had gifted her. All of it felt like payment for a service, not tokens of love. They were shackles, and she was shedding them. She went to her grandmother's antique jewelry box, a simple, velvet-lined chest. Inside, she took out the pieces that truly mattered, a string of pearls her grandfather had given her grandmother, a sapphire ring that was a family heirloom. These were her history, her lineage untainted by Julian's money. Her final stop was the nursery. She stood in the doorway, her hand protectively on her belly. The soft, neutral colors, the little rocking horse, the mobile of smiling stars, it was a room full of promises now broken. Tears streamed down her face, silent and hot. She allowed herself this one moment of pure, unadulterated grief for the future that had been stolen. Then she took a deep breath, steeling her resolve. She pulled out her phone and took several clear, detailed photos of the room, of every toy, every book, every tiny pair of shoes. It was evidence. Evidence of his supposed devotion. Evidence of the child he had claimed to want so desperately. As she turned to leave, she saw it on the floor, partially kicked under the dresser. A man's silver cufflink, engraved with the initials J.C. It must have fallen off in his haste to get dressed that morning. She picked it up, its cold weight, a solid thing in her palm. It felt symbolic. He was careless. He was arrogant, and his arrogance would be his downfall. She walked out of the penthouse for the last time, leaving the keycard on the marble countertop. She left behind the diamonds, the couture, the art on the walls. She walked away from the life of Amelia Croft. In its place, a new woman was being forged in the fires of betrayal. A woman with nothing to lose and a son to protect. The disappearing act was complete. Phase 2 was about to begin. 3 months passed. Autumn in New York gave way to the biting winds of winter. In a quiet, snow-dusted town in Vermont, nestled amongst pine trees and rolling hills, Amelia was slowly, painstakingly rebuilding her life. She had rented a small, rustic cottage under the name Anna Stone, a tribute to her grandmother's maiden name. The name Amelia Croft, and the woman who answered to it, felt like a character from a novel she'd once read. Her brother Marcus had been her rock. He helped her find the cottage and handled the initial communications, or lack thereof, with Julian's army of lawyers. Their letters, filled with legal jargon and veiled threats, demanded her return, citing her erratic behavior and emotional instability due to her pregnancy. They were trying to build a case against her, to paint her as an unfit mother. But Marcus, with his methodical mind, countered each letter, calmly stating only that his sister was in a safe place, recuperating from a significant trauma, and would not be intimidated. Life in Vermont was a stark contrast to the opulence of Manhattan. There was no room service, no private drivers, no galas to attend. Instead, there were log fires, the crunch of snow under her boots, and the comforting anonymity of a small town where no one knew her name or her history. She spent her days reading, taking long, solitary walks, and preparing for the arrival of her son. The physical act of knitting a tiny blue hat, the yarn soft in her hands, was more therapeutic than any session with the high-priced therapists Julian had once insisted she see. She found a part-time job working remotely for an old college friend, Chloe, who ran a small but successful rare book dealership. Amelia had a degree in art history, a passion she had set aside to play the role of the perfect corporate wife. Now her knowledge of provenance of art of history became her lifeline. She spent hours researching the origins of antique books and manuscripts, losing herself in stories from centuries past. It was quiet, meticulous work that soothed her fractured soul. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of purpose that was entirely her own. Her pregnancy progressed, her belly swelling with the new life that was both her reason for escaping and her hope for the future. She found a local doctor, a kind, middle-aged woman named Dr. Albright, who listened with gentle empathy as Amelia gave her a heavily redacted version of her story. Meanwhile, back in New York, Julian's world was beginning to show cracks around the edges. He had successfully managed to keep the incident out of the tabloids, thanks to a small fortune paid in hush money to a few key office staff, and a carefully crafted story about Amelia needing rest at an exclusive wellness retreat in Switzerland. Isabella had been sent away, packed off to a job in London, conveniently removing her from the picture. But the silence from Amelia was unnerving him. He had expected tears, screaming matches, dramatic scenes. He had expected to be able to use his charm, his money, to smooth things over as he always had. Her complete and total disappearance was a move he hadn't anticipated. It was a rejection, not just of him, but of the power and control he wielded. He hired a team of the best private investigators money could buy. They were discreet, thorough, and utterly ruthless. They scoured flight manifests, tracked credit card usage, and interviewed her estranged friends. But Amelia had been clever. She had paid for everything in cash, created a new identity, and communicated with no one from her past, except Marcus, who used encrypted messaging apps. She had vanished into thin air. The strain was beginning to show. Julian became short-tempered at work. His legendary focus faltered. A major acquisition, he was spearheading a deal with a Japanese tech firm called Hoshino Dynamics, began to face unexpected hurdles. The normally meticulous Julian was missing details, his mind clearly elsewhere. His investors, the lifeblood of his empire, were starting to murmur. The king was distracted, and the sharks were circling. One evening, as Amelia was cataloguing a 19th century edition of Jane Eyre for Chloe's dealership, she stumbled upon something. Tucked within the pages was an old, faded letter. It wasn't part of the book's known history. It was a personal letter, written by a woman to her sister, detailing her heartbreak over a husband's betrayal and her decision to leave him and start anew in America. The parallels were so striking, so poignant, that Amelia felt a shiver run down her spine. The woman wrote of her fear, but also of a burgeoning sense of freedom, of becoming the author of my own tale. The words resonated deep within Amelia. She was no longer just a victim of Julian's story. She was the author of her own. This realization settled in her, a quiet but powerful shift. She was not just hiding. She was growing. A few days later, a package arrived from Marcus. Inside, amongst some books and supplies, was a small, unmarked envelope. Her brother's note simply said, "I think you should see this." Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs as she opened it. Inside were several photographs, grainy, but clear, taken from a distance. They were of Julian. He was leaving a high-end restaurant in Manhattan. But he wasn't alone. On his arm, looking possessively at him, was a woman Amelia had never seen before. She was impossibly chic, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of formidable power. The accompanying note from Marcus's contact read, Julian Croft with Reina Hoshino, CEO of Hoshino Dynamics. The deal is rumored to be in trouble. Looks like he's trying a different kind of negotiation. Amelia stared at the photograph, a cold fury rising within her. It had been less than 4 months. 4 months since he had destroyed their lives, and he was already moving on, using his charm on another powerful woman to secure a business deal. The pain was sharp, but it was quickly overshadowed by something else, a cold, hard clarity. He hadn't loved her. He had acquired her. She was a beautiful object, the perfect accessory for a man of his stature. And when that object was no longer convenient, he was ready to replace it. But the photograph revealed another, more critical piece of information. It showed Julian's weakness. His ambition, his insatiable need for success, was his Achilles' heel. He was predictable. And for the first time, Amelia realized that she was not. She looked down at her belly, feeling the strong, steady kick of her son. He deserved more than a father who saw people as assets to be managed or discarded. He deserved a mother who would fight for him. She picked up her phone and made a call to Chloe, her friend with the book dealership. "Chloe," she said, her voice steady and clear, "I need a favor. You have contacts in the art and antiques world all over, right? Even in Japan." "Of course," Chloe replied, intrigued. "What do you need?" "I need you to find out everything you can about Reina Hoshino." Amelia said the name, tasting like ash in her mouth. Not her business life, her personal life, what she collects, what she loves, what she's passionate about. The phoenix was no longer content to simply rise from the ashes. She was ready to command the flames. The Vermont winter deepened, blanketing the world in a pristine, silent white. But inside Amelia's small cottage, a quiet storm was brewing. Chloe, with her extensive and discreet network, proved to be a formidable ally. Within weeks, she had compiled a detailed dossier on Reina Hoshino that went far beyond what any business journal could provide. Reina was not just a CEO, she was a cultural powerhouse in Japan, a fierce protector of her nation's artistic heritage. She was the sole heir to the Hoshino dynasty, a family that traced its lineage back to the Edo period. But her true passion, the place where her heart lay, was in collecting rare ukiyo-e woodblock prints, specifically the works of the enigmatic 18th century artist Sharaku. According to Chloe's sources, Reina was obsessed with finding a complete set of his actor portraits, a nearly impossible feat, as several were thought to be lost to time. As Amelia read the report, a plan began to form, intricate and audacious. It was a long shot, a gamble of epic proportions, but it was the only weapon she had. Her own past, the one she had so carefully locked away, held the key. Before Julian, before the gilded cage of New York high society, Amelia had been a different person. After graduating with top honors in art history, she hadn't immediately sought a comfortable gallery job. Instead, she had moved to Kyoto, immersing herself in the study of East Asian art restoration under a legendary master, a man known simply as Sensei Ishikawa. For 2 years, she had lived a Spartan life, learning the delicate art of kintsugi, mending broken pottery with gold, and the meticulous, painstaking process of restoring ancient scrolls and prints. It was during this time that she had come into contact with a hidden world of private collectors of art that rarely saw the light of a museum. And through Sensei Ishikawa, she had been granted a private viewing of a collection that belonged to a reclusive old family in the Japanese countryside. In that collection, she had seen it a pristine, unrecorded woodblock print by Sharaku. It was one of the lost actor portraits. The memory was seared into her mind, the vibrant colors, the expressive face, the artist's unique seal. Julian knew she had studied art, but he'd always dismissed it as a cute hobby. He had no idea of the depth of her knowledge or the connections she had made. Her past was a blind spot in his otherwise thorough surveillance of her life. Now that blind spot was about to become his undoing. Amelia's first step was to contact Sensei Ishikawa. It was a risk, as his name could potentially be linked to her, but she used a secure encrypted channel writing in formal Japanese. She didn't reveal her situation, but spoke of a renewed academic interest in Sharaku. She inquired with the utmost respect about the private collection she had viewed years ago. The reply came a week later. The old master remembered her well, his most gifted student with the soul of a poet. He informed her that the elderly owner of the collection had passed away, and his heirs, who had little interest in art, were quietly looking to sell. The Sharaku print was indeed available. The price was astronomical, far beyond the means of Anna Stone. But Amelia had no intention of buying it. She simply needed to control the information of its existence. Her plan had two fronts. The first was aimed at Julian's ego, the second at Reina Hoshino's heart. Using a burner phone and a voice modulator, she made an anonymous call to a notorious financial gossip columnist in New York, a man known for his poison pen and his ability to move markets with a single, well-placed rumor. "I have a tip about the Hoshino Dynamics deal," the distorted voice said. "Julian Croft isn't sealing the deal with his business acumen. He's trying to seduce the CEO. But he's out of his league. Reina Hoshino is a shark, and she's about to eat him alive. Sources say she's just playing with him to get better terms, laughing at the charming American behind his back." She knew Julian's pride. He subscribed to all the industry rags, obsessed with his public image. The suggestion that he was being played, that a woman was making a fool of him, would be infuriating. It would make him reckless. The second, more delicate phase involved Reina. Amelia, through one of Chloe's most trusted contacts in the Tokyo art scene, arranged for an anonymous message to be delivered to Miss Hoshino. It was not an offer to sell. It was a whisper, a tantalizing hint. The message simply said, "The lost portrait of Ichikawa Omezo is not lost. It rests in a private collection, and its owners are considering a sale. Proof of its existence can be provided to a serious and discreet potential buyer." It included an email address, an encrypted and untraceable account Amelia had created. The bait was cast. Now she had to wait. The gossip column hit the internet a few days later, and the fallout was immediate. The rumor spread like wildfire through the financial world. Julian was incandescent with rage. The whispers in his own boardroom grew louder. His deal with Hoshino Dynamics, which was already on shaky ground, now seemed to be teetering on the brink of collapse due to his unprofessional conduct. He became obsessed, doubling his efforts to charm Reina to prove the rumors wrong. But his desperation began to show his smooth facade cracking under the pressure. Then an email landed in Amelia's encrypted inbox. The sender was anonymous, but the tone was imperious and direct. "I am an associate of a party interested in the Sharaku print. We require proof." Amelia's heart pounded. It was Reina's camp. She replied with a single image. It was not a photograph of the print itself. That would be too risky. Instead, it was a high-resolution scan of a small, almost imperceptible detail from the corner of the print, a specific fiber in the washi paper that she had noted during her viewing years ago. It was a detail only someone who had seen the genuine article up close would recognize. For added authenticity, she included a digitally overlaid timestamp from that day. It was a ghost in the machine, a digital fingerprint that proved her claim without revealing the whole picture. She was playing a dangerous game. She was a pregnant woman in a remote cottage manipulating two of the most powerful people in the world. But she felt a thrill she hadn't experienced in years. The fear was still there, a constant companion, but it was now mixed with a potent cocktail of adrenaline and resolve. A week later, a second email from Rayner's associate arrived. "The proof is intriguing. My principal wishes to know the conditions of a potential sale." Amelia took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth. She typed her reply carefully, every word a calculated move in her high-stakes chess game. "The print is not for sale to just anyone. The current owners wish for it to go to a true connoisseur, someone who will cherish it. They are, however, open to a private off-market transfer. But first, they have one condition. They have heard troubling rumors about the business practices of an American associate of yours, a Mr. Julian Croft. They are a traditional family and value honor above all else. They will not entertain any dealings, direct or indirect, with anyone associated with a man of his questionable character. Sever all ties with him, publicly, and then we can discuss the art." She hit send. She had linked the two parts of her plan. She had put Reina Hoshino in an impossible position, force her to choose between the deal of a lifetime and the art of a lifetime. She had weaponized a centuries-old piece of paper against a billion-dollar corporation. Julian thought he was fighting a business rival and a scorned wife. He had no idea he was actually battling a ghost from the past, an art historian who knew the price of everything and the value of honor. The trap was set. Now all she could do was wait to see if the Queen would take the bait. The silence that followed was deafening. For 2 weeks, Amelia heard nothing. She checked her encrypted email a dozen times a day, her anxiety a knot in her stomach. Had she overplayed her hand? Was her demand too audacious, too unbelievable? The pressure was immense. She was in her final trimester, her body heavy and tired, and the constant stress was taking its toll. Marcus called daily, his worried voice a lifeline across the miles. Meanwhile, the gossip mill in New York was in overdrive. The rumor she had planted had morphed and grown, taking on a life of its own. Anonymous sources were now confirming that the Hoshino deal was dead, a casualty of Julian Croft's hubris. His company's stock took a noticeable dip. Julian, in a desperate attempt at damage control, leaked a statement to the press, vehemently denying any unprofessional conduct and insisting the negotiations were proceeding smoothly. He appeared on a financial news network, his smile stretched a little too tight, his usual confidence ringing hollow. He was bleeding and he knew it. But what he couldn't possibly know was that the hand wielding the knife was the same one he had once adorned with a 10-carat diamond ring. Then one snowy morning, the world shifted. The news broke not through a whisper or a rumor, but like a thunderclap. Hoshino Dynamics released an official public statement. It was cold, concise, and utterly brutal. Hoshino Dynamics has ceased all negotiations with Croft Holdings. After a period of due diligence, we have concluded that the corporate culture and leadership at Croft Holdings do not align with our company's long-held principles of honor and integrity. We will be seeking other partners for our North American expansion. The phrase honor and integrity was a dagger twisted with surgical precision. It didn't just kill the deal, it assassinated Julian's character on a global stage. The financial world was stunned. No one walked away from a deal this big, this publicly, this scathingly. Amelia saw the news on her laptop and felt a dizzying mix of triumph and terror. It had worked. Her ghost story, her whisper of a lost piece of art, had brought a titan to his knees. Reina Hoshino, the formidable queen of industry, had made her move. She had chosen the art. In New York, Julian Croft's world imploded. His phone rang off the hook with calls from furious investors, board members, and journalists. The stock plummeted, wiping hundreds of millions off the company's valuation in a single day. He was a pariah. The man who had prided himself on control had lost it completely. His rage, unable to find its true target, turned inward and then outward, seeking a scapegoat. He fired Margaret, his loyal assistant of 15 years, accusing her of leaking information. He screamed at his legal team, and in a fit of alcohol-fueled paranoia, his mind finally went where it should have gone months ago. Amelia. This wasn't just bad luck. This was sabotage. This was personal. The timing, the language of the press release, honor, it all pointed to a deliberate, calculated attack. He had grossly underestimated her. He had seen a docile, heartbroken creature, and in her place stood a brilliant, vengeful strategist. He redoubled his efforts to find her no longer caring about discretion. He unleashed his private investigators with a new ferocity, a blank check and a single command: find her. He needed to confront her, to control her, to silence her before she could do any more damage. A few days after the Hoshino announcement, an email landed in Amelia's secure inbox. It was from Reina's associate. "The condition has been met. My principal is now ready to discuss the acquisition." Amelia's hands trembled as she typed her response. She proposed a method of communication and verification that was worthy of a spy novel involving a neutral third-party art appraiser in Geneva and a series of coded messages sent through an online chess forum. It was designed to be slow, deliberate, and above all, safe. She needed to buy herself more time. Her due date was just weeks away. Reina, clearly a woman who appreciated a well-played game, agreed to the terms. The intricate dance began, Amelia posing as an intermediary for the reclusive owners, slowly fed Reina's camp details about the print, each one verifiable by the expert in Geneva, but never revealing enough to pinpoint its location. It was during this period that the next twist occurred, one Amelia had not anticipated. A manila envelope with no return address arrived at her cottage. Her blood ran cold, thinking Julian's investigators had found her. But the postmark was from London. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small memory stick. The letter was from Isabella. Her handwriting was a shaky scrawl, a stark contrast to her usual flamboyant script. "Amelia, I know you will never forgive me, and I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that it wasn't just about what you think. Julian is a monster, but not just because he cheats. He's a criminal. Before he sent me away, I was scared. He threatened me. I took something from his home office computer as insurance. I don't know what it all means, but I know it's bad. It's offshore accounts, shell corporations' names I don't recognize. He is not the man anyone thinks he is. This is all I can do to try and make things right. Be careful. He's more dangerous than you can imagine." With a deep sense of dread, Amelia inserted the memory stick into her laptop. It contained dozens of files, spreadsheets, bank statements from places like the Cayman Islands and Liechtenstein, and encrypted documents. She didn't understand the complex financial jargon, but she understood the pattern. It looked like a massive money laundering scheme. Julian wasn't just a titan of finance. He was a master criminal using his legitimate business as a front for a far darker enterprise. The Hoshino deal wasn't just about expansion. It was likely about laundering a new massive influx of dirty money. The revelation changed everything. This was no longer a story of infidelity and revenge. She had stumbled into something far more dangerous. Julian wouldn't just be angry if he found her. He would be desperate. A man with this much to hide would stop at nothing to protect his secrets. Her son wasn't just the child of a cheating husband, but the heir to a criminal empire. The stakes had been raised to an entirely new level. Her gambit with Raina had been about justice. Now it was about survival. She had to expose him completely and irrevocably, not just for what he did to her, but for whatever crimes he had committed. She looked at the files, then at the chess game playing out on her screen with Raina's team. She had the queen on her side, and now a memory stick full of dynamite from a disgraced knave. All the pieces were in place. It was time to plan the checkmate. The birth of her son, whom she named Ethan, meaning strong and enduring, was both an anchor and a catalyst. Holding him in her arms in the quiet Vermont hospital, Amelia felt a primal surge of protective love, so fierce it eclipsed all her fear. Ethan was her future, a future she would cleanse of Julian Croft's toxic legacy. The time for hiding was over. The time for a final decisive confrontation had come. Her plan for the endgame was as intricate and layered as the schemes Julian himself had woven. It required perfect timing, unwavering nerve, and the coordinated efforts of her unlikely allies. Her first move was with Raina Hoshino. Through their clandestine channels, Amelia, still the anonymous intermediary, made her final offer regarding the Sharaku print. The owners have been deeply impressed by your commitment to artistic integrity. They no longer wish to sell the print. Instead, they wish to gift it to you under one final condition, that you are the one to personally and publicly expose the full extent of Julian Croft's financial crimes. She attached a single heavily encrypted file from Isabella's memory stick, a damning spreadsheet showing a clear trail of money flowing from a known criminal organization into a shell corporation owned by Croft Holdings. It was the smoking gun. She was giving Raina not just the motivation, the print, but the ammunition to do what needed to be done. It was a brilliant move. A foreign national of Raina's stature exposing him would attract international attention and bypass any corrupt officials Julian might have in his pocket in the US. To Raina, it was the ultimate power play. She would not only acquire the priceless artwork that had obsessed her for years, but would also be seen as a global champion of corporate ethics, cementing her reputation as she expanded into a new market. It was an offer she couldn't refuse. Amelia's second move was to orchestrate the confrontation. She knew Julian's investigators were closing in. She could feel their presence, a tightening net. So she decided to choose the battlefield. She sent one final, untraceable message not to Julian, but to Marcus. The nest is empty. Time for the final act. The plaza. Presidential suite. 48 hours. She knew Julian had likely compromised her brother's communications and would intercept the message. It was a deliberate lure. The Plaza Hotel, the scene of so many of their early happy dates, was the perfect poetic location for his downfall. Her third move was her bravest. She called the one person she knew Julian feared and respected in the legal world, the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, a formidable prosecutor named David Chen, whom Julian had often mentioned with a mix of professional admiration and caution. Posing as a confidential informant, she laid out the broad strokes of the case, promising irrefutable evidence that would be delivered by an unimpeachable source, Reina Hoshino, within 48 hours. She gave him the what, the when, and the where. The day of the confrontation was surreal. Amelia checked into the presidential suite at the plaza, a place that screamed of the wealth she now despised. She was no longer the timid wife. She was calm, centered, a general before a battle. Ethan was safe with Chloe miles away, shielded from the impending fallout. Marcus was waiting in the wings, ready to act as her legal counsel once the dust settled. At precisely 8:00 p.m., there was a knock on the door. Julian stood there, flanked by two imposing men who were clearly not his usual security. His face was a thunderous mask of rage. The charm was gone, replaced by a cold reptilian fury. "So the little mouse decided to come out of her hole," he sneered, striding into the room. "Did you really think you could hide from me? Did you think you could ruin me and get away with it?" Amelia stood by the grand fireplace, a picture of serene composure. "It's over, Julian." He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Over. It's just beginning. You have no idea what you've done. You've signed your own death warrant." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You are going to sign a statement saying you've been suffering from postpartum psychosis, that you fabricated everything. You will give me back my son, and you will disappear. For good this time." "Your son," Amelia's voice was laced with ice. "You don't have a son. You have a liability, a loose end, just like me, just like Isabella, just like Reina Hoshino. We're all just pieces on your board, aren't we?" As she spoke, the large television screen in the suite flickered to life. It was a live feed from a press conference in Tokyo. Reina Hoshino stood at a podium, her face a mask of cold fury. "Today, I am announcing that Hoshino Dynamics has provided international law enforcement agencies with evidence of a significant multi-year money laundering operation masterminded by American CEO Julian Croft," she announced in crisp English. Julian's face went white. He stared at the screen, his bravado evaporating. On the screen, Reina's assistant held up documents, the same documents from Isabella's memory stick. "Furthermore," Reina continued, "as a gesture of our commitment to restoring honor to the world of art and business, I am humbled to announce the recovery of a long-lost national treasure." The screen behind her changed, showing a stunning high-definition image of the Sharaku print. This masterpiece, which was being held hostage by criminal elements associated with Mr. Croft, has been returned to the people of Japan. It was a masterstroke of narrative. Reina had not only exposed him, but had also woven the art into the story, painting Julian as not just a white-collar criminal, but a cultural vandal. Julian stumbled backward, his eyes wide with disbelief. "How? You underestimated us all, Julian," Amelia said softly. "You saw a lovesick wife, a pathetic cousin, a foreign businesswoman. You never saw the women who were tired of being your pawns." At that precise moment, the doors to the suite burst open. It wasn't Julian's thugs. It was a team of FBI agents, led by a grim-faced David Chen. "Julian Croft," Chen announced, his voice booming in the suddenly silent room. "You are under arrest for conspiracy wire fraud and money laundering." Julian stared from the agents to Amelia, his face a grotesque mixture of hatred and defeat. The master of the universe, cornered in a hotel suite, his empire crumbling on live television. As the agents cuffed him, his eyes locked on Amelia's one last time. There was no remorse, only pure, unadulterated venom. Amelia didn't flinch. She simply held his gaze, a Saint Testament to the woman he had failed to see. She had not only walked away without looking back, she had burned the whole corrupt kingdom to the ground behind her. In the end, it wasn't about the money, the betrayal, or even the revenge. It was about a woman reclaiming her own story. Amelia didn't just walk away from a cheating husband. She dismantled a criminal empire with intelligence, courage, and the help of an unlikely sisterhood forged in the fires of his deceit. She proved that true strength isn't about the life you're given, but the one you have the courage to build for yourself brick by painful brick. Her story is a powerful reminder that even in our darkest moments when we feel most invisible, we have the power to rewrite our own ending. What did you think of Amelia's ultimate checkmate? Did Julian get what he deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of strength and survival, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more tales of justice and empowerment. Thank you for listening. The air at the Sterling-Rossi wedding tasted of money, old new, and oceans of it. Lilies imported from Dutch glasshouses fought a losing battle against the cloying scent of 1,000 competing perfumes. Isabella Rossi, 7 months pregnant and radiant, in a gown that cost more than a suburban house, felt a single cold drop of sweat trace its way down her spine. Her fiancé, Richard Sterling, the man who was supposed to be waiting for her at the end of the aisle, was missing, and in the pit of her stomach, where their child kicked softly, a primal instinct screamed that this was no simple case of cold feet. She was about to discover a betrayal so profound it would not only shatter her heart, but threaten to bring 2 corporate empires crashing to the ground. The union of Isabella Rossi and Richard Sterling was less a romance and more a coronation. It was the merger of 2 dynasties, a meticulously planned corporate maneuver, wrapped in the fairy tale trappings of a high society wedding. The Rossis, with Isabella at the helm of their marketing division, commanded a global luxury goods empire. Rossi lifestyle, built on Italian craftsmanship and timeless elegance. The Sterlings, a colder, sharper dynasty of American finance, were led by Richard's formidable mother, Victoria Sterling. Their firm Sterling Holdings had its tendrils in every corner of the global market. The marriage was the final seal on a multi-billion-dollar merger agreement, a pact that would create a conglomerate of unparalleled power, Sterling-Rossi Global. To the outside world, Isabella and Richard were the perfect couple. She was the warm, creative heart. He was the charming, ambitious face of new money. Their courtship had been a whirlwind of paparazzi flashes, charity galas, and weekend trips to Monaco on the Sterling private jet. Richard had courted her with the kind of grand cinematic gestures that left gossip columnists breathless. He'd once filled her Milan apartment with 1,000 white orchids, her favorite simply because she'd had a stressful week. He'd written her name in the sky over the Hamptons. He was attentive, devoted, and seemed utterly captivated by her. But a gilded cage is still a cage. Isabella's brother, Leo Rossi, never trusted him. Leo, 2 years her senior, was the stoic, watchful CEO of the Rossi empire. He had the soul of an old-world craftsman and the mind of a shark. "He performs for you, Bella," he'd told her a month before the wedding, his voice low and serious over a glass of Barolo in his study. "No one is that perfect. He's playing a role, and you need to figure out what his script is." Isabella had dismissed it as brotherly overprotectiveness. "You see everyone as a business opponent, Leo. He loves me, and I love him." Her love was genuine. She saw past the polished sterling veneer to a man she believed was simply trying to live up to the impossible expectations of his mother. Victoria Sterling was a woman carved from ice and ambition. She viewed emotion as a liability and affection as a currency to be dispensed sparingly and strategically. She approved of Isabella not as a daughter-in-law, but as a priceless asset. The pregnancy, which they had announced 3 months prior, had only increased Isabella's value in Victoria's cold calculus. A male heir would solidify the dynasty. The wedding preparations had been a military-grade operation orchestrated by Victoria. The venue was a historic Long Island estate, its sprawling lawns rolling down to the calm, grey waters of the Sound. The guest list was a who's who of global finance, European aristocracy, and Hollywood royalty. Every detail was curated to scream power. The champagne was vintage, the orchestra was from Vienna, and the 5-tier wedding cake was a confectionery marvel flown in from Paris. The week leading up to the ceremony had been a blur of contractual meetings disguised as family dinners. Lawyers outnumbered cousins. The talk was of stock options, board seats, and brand synergy. Richard, usually so attentive, had become distant, his phone a permanent fixture in his hand. He'd wave away her concerns with a dazzling smile. Just last-minute merger madness, my love. The price of building our empire. After Saturday, it's just you, me, and the little one. I promise. He had a best man, Marcus Thorne, who was also a senior VP at Sterling Holdings. Marcus was slick and obsequious, always laughing a little too loudly at Richard's jokes, his eyes constantly scanning the room. Isabella found him unnerving. He had a way of looking at her, a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. Resentment, perhaps, or a predatory hunger that was deeply unsettling. She'd mentioned it to Richard once, who had simply laughed it off. Marcus, he's harmless, a bit of a suck-up, but he's been my right hand for years. Don't you worry your beautiful head about him. On the morning of the wedding, the bride's suite at the estate was a flurry of activity. Her mother, Sophia Rossi, a woman whose warmth was a direct contrast to Victoria's frost, was fussing with the lace on her veil. Her bridesmaids, a giggling trio of her oldest friends from university, were sipping champagne. But Isabella couldn't shake a deep, gnawing anxiety. She hadn't seen Richard that morning. He had stayed at a nearby hotel with Marcus, as per tradition, but he had promised to come to her suite for a private moment before the chaos began, just the two of them. He was an hour late. She'd called him twice. The first time it went straight to voicemail. The second time he'd answered his voice breathless and rushed. Sorry, darling. Got held up. Marcus needed me for something. A little best man crisis. I'm on my way now. I love you. But there was a noise in the background, a faint feminine giggle. Before she could ask, he'd hung up. Everything all right, Cara? Her mother asked, her gentle hands stilling on her shoulders. Isabella forced a smile. Fine, Mama. Just nerves. But it wasn't nerves. It was a splinter of doubt lodged deep in her heart that was beginning to fester. She walked to the grand window of the suite, which overlooked the perfectly manicured gardens where hundreds of guests were already beginning to gather. She saw Victoria Sterling holding court near the grand floral arch, a triumphant queen surveying her kingdom. She saw Leo standing apart, his hands clasped behind his back, his jaw tight as he stared toward the main house. Their child chose that moment to give a strong, decisive kick. Isabella placed a hand on her stomach, a silent promise running through her. I will protect you, always. The words were a vow, though she did not yet know the war she was about to declare. The drop of sweat completed its journey down her back, and the fairy tale began to curdle. The stage was set, the audience was waiting, but the leading man had gone off script, and Isabella was about to become the director of an entirely different kind of show. The minutes stretched into an eternity, each one taut with an unspoken tension that began to suffocate the joyous atmosphere of the bride's suite. The laughter of her bridesmaids became forced. The bubbles in their champagne seemed to die with a fizz of anxiety. Isabella's phone remained silent on the antique vanity, a sleek black mirror reflecting her perfectly made-up face, a mask of serene beauty that was beginning to crack at the edges. "He'll be here," her friend Jessica said, a little too brightly. "You know what grooms are like. Probably lost his cufflinks or something." But Isabella knew Richard. He was meticulously organized, a trait hammered into him by his mother. He didn't lose things. He didn't run late for appointments of this magnitude, not unless he was distracted. The wedding planner, a severe woman named Ms. Albright with a headset permanently attached to her ear, appeared at the door. "5 minutes, Ms. Rossi. Your father is waiting downstairs. The guests are seated." Her eyes darted around the room, noting the absence of the groom. A flicker of professional panic crossed her face before being ruthlessly suppressed. "He was supposed to be here," Isabella said, her voice quiet. "I'm sure he's on his way to the altar." Ms. Albright chirped, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Shall we?" Isabella took a deep breath, the boning of her custom-made gown feeling suddenly like a straitjacket. "I need a moment. Please. Just tell my father 2 more minutes." As soon as the door clicked shut, she looked at her brother's number and pressed call. He answered on the first ring. "Where is he, Leo?" she asked, dispensing with pleasantries. Leo's voice was grim. "I don't know. Marcus is out there by the archway, looking like the cat that swallowed the canary. He told me Richard was composing himself. Victoria is starting to look murderous, and not in her usual way." A new wave of nausea washed over her, this one having nothing to do with her pregnancy. "Leo, he called an hour ago. He said he was with Marcus. I heard a girl laugh." Silence on the other end of the line. When Leo finally spoke, all traces of forced calm were gone. His voice was cold steel. "Where are you, Bella?" "In the suite. They want me to start walking." "Don't move," he commanded. "Don't go anywhere. I'm coming up. Something is wrong." The call ended. Isabella stood frozen in the middle of the opulent room. Her friends watched her, their earlier cheerfulness replaced by a shared silent dread. The scent of lilies was now overwhelming funereal. It was the scent of decay. She had to know. "I need some air," she announced, her voice surprisingly steady. She began walking toward the door, her heavy train whispering behind her. "Bella, wait," her mother cried out. "Your dress, you can't go out there." But Isabella didn't stop. She moved with a purpose that scattered her entourage like birds. She swept past Ms. Albright in the hallway, ignoring her frantic protests. She ignored the confused looks from caterers and staff. Her instincts were a roaring fire in her gut, guiding her steps, pulling her not towards the garden, not towards the ceremony, but in the opposite direction, down a secluded corridor that led to the estate's private wing. The library, the billiards room, and a series of small private studies reserved for the estate's owners. It was a part of the house the guests were not meant to see. The air here was still and cool. The thick carpet absorbed the sound of her footsteps. She passed the grand library, its doors firmly shut. She passed the billiards room. And then she saw it. At the end of the hall, the door to the smallest study, the one with the old mahogany desk and the view of the secluded woods, was slightly ajar. A sliver of light cut across the dark hallway, and from within she heard a sound that would be seared into her memory forever. It wasn't a giggle this time. It was a soft, breathy moan. Her blood ran cold. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. For a moment, she couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Her hand, clutching the bouquet of white peonies and roses, began to tremble violently. The baby inside her was still, as if sensing the impending shockwave. This was a dream, a nightmare. It had to be. In a moment, she would wake up in her bed, and Richard would be there, and this horrible, suffocating feeling would be gone. Then she heard his voice, low and husky, a voice she knew better than her own. "We don't have much time." He said his words punctuated by another soft, feminine sound. Anger, white hot and volcanic, erupted through the ice of her shock. It propelled her forward. Her trembling stopped. Her hand was steady. She didn't throw the door open. She pushed it slowly, silently. The scene that greeted her was a tableau of obscene betrayal. It wasn't a quick, stolen kiss. It was far, far worse. Richard, her Richard, was there, his perfectly tailored wedding tuxedo jacket thrown carelessly over a chair. His bow tie was undone, hanging loosely around his neck, and his shirt was unbuttoned, revealing his chest. He was leaning against the large mahogany desk, and in his arms, her body pressed against his, was a woman. Isabella recognized her instantly. It was Scarlett Dubois, a junior analyst from Sterling Holdings, a pretty brunette with ambitious eyes whom Richard had once dismissed as eager but harmless. Scarlett's dress, a slinky emerald green number completely inappropriate for a morning wedding, was hiked up high on her thighs. Her hands were tangled in Richard's hair. Her lipstick, a garish shade of crimson, was smeared around her mouth. And on the desk, next to a half-empty glass of what looked like whiskey, sat Richard's phone. They hadn't seen her. They were lost in their sordid little world, just meters away from where their families, their friends, their entire world awaited their union. Isabella didn't scream. She didn't cry. A strange, terrifying calm washed over her. It was the calm of the eye of a hurricane, a pocket of absolute stillness before total devastation. She took one step into the room. The heel of her shoe clicked on the hardwood floor just inside the doorway. It was the only sound needed. Richard's head snapped up. His eyes widened first in confusion, then in pure, unadulterated horror. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking pasty and sick. He shoved Scarlett away from him so abruptly that she stumbled backward, nearly falling. "Bella." He choked out his voice, a strangled whisper. It's not what it looks like." It was the oldest, most pathetic cliché in the book, and it was the spark that lit the fuse. Isabella looked from his panicked face to Scarlett's, who was now staring at her with a mixture of fear and defiance. She looked at his undone shirt, at the smeared lipstick, at the jacket, lying discarded like a promise he'd just thrown away. Then her gaze fell to the phone on the desk. She said nothing. She simply turned and walked away. "Bella, wait. Please." Richard's desperate cry followed her down the hall. She heard him scrambling, fumbling to fix his clothes to chase after her. But just as he reached the hallway, another figure appeared, blocking his path. It was Leo. His face was a mask of thunderous rage. He had seen her face as she emerged from the corridor, and he had understood everything in an instant. "You are not taking one more step toward my sister." Leo snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He placed a firm hand on Richard's chest, stopping him cold. Isabella didn't look back. She kept walking her back straight, her head held high. She walked past the confused staff, past Ms. Albright, who was now babbling into her headset. She walked to the grand staircase where her father, a kind man with a gentle face, was waiting for her, his expression a mixture of pride and confusion. "Isabella, what's wrong? Where have you been?" he asked, his voice full of concern. She looked at her father, the man who had always protected her, and for the first time a single tear escaped and traced a path through her perfect makeup. She wiped it away with the back of her hand. "The wedding is off," she said, her voice ringing with a clarity that cut through the air. She didn't wait for his response. She lifted the microphone from the small podium that had been set up for the officiant. Her hand was rock steady. She walked past the stunned string quartet, past the floral arch, and stood before the hundreds of seated guests. The murmuring crowd fell silent, their faces a sea of confusion. They saw a bride impossibly beautiful standing alone at the altar. They expected a tearful announcement of a delay. They expected an apology. They got a revolution. The silence that fell over the garden was absolute. It was a heavy, breathless void, filled only by the distant cry of a seagull and the rustle of leaves in the sea breeze. Hundreds of pairs of eyes were fixed on Isabella, a solitary figure in white against a backdrop of obscene floral abundance. In the front row, Victoria Sterling's face had tightened into a mask of confused displeasure. She started to rise a silent command for Isabella to step down, but a sharp look from Leo, who had now taken a position a few feet to his sister's right, froze her in place. Isabella's knuckles were white where she gripped the microphone. She could feel the baby, a tiny, innocent life, nestled safely inside her. That thought was her anchor. It was her strength. She wasn't just a jilted bride. She was a mother, protecting her child from a legacy of lies before it could even begin. She lifted the microphone to her lips. Her voice, when it came, did not tremble. It was clear, resonant, and carried the cold, hard weight of undeniable truth. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her gaze sweeping across the assembled crowd, deliberately avoiding Richard's family. "I want to thank you all for coming here today to celebrate what was meant to be a joyous occasion." A nervous titter went through the crowd. This was not the expected script. "I have a brief announcement to make," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "There will be no wedding today." A collective gasp rippled through the guests. Phones previously tucked away out of politeness began to emerge from pockets and purses. Victoria Sterling was now fully on her feet, her face ashen, her eyes shooting daggers at Isabella. "The union between the Rossi and Sterling families, and by extension the merger between our companies, is hereby cancelled, effective immediately." This was no longer a personal drama. It was a corporate bombshell. Murmurs erupted into a low roar. Men in tailored suits began speaking urgently into their phones. The stock market wasn't open on a Saturday, but they knew the bloodbath that would ensue on Monday morning. "Bella, stop this!" Victoria's voice was a sharp, piercing shriek that cut through the noise. "You are hysterical. What is the meaning of this?" Isabella finally turned her eyes to Victoria. There was no fear in her gaze, only a chilling, profound pity. "You should ask your son, Victoria," she said, her voice dropping yet still carrying across the amplified system. "You should ask him what he was doing just a few moments ago in the estate's private study." At that moment, Richard finally appeared at the edge of the garden, skidding to a halt on the manicured grass. He had managed to straighten his clothes, but his face was a wreck of sweat and panic. Marcus Thorne was beside him, whispering frantically in his ear. Scarlett was nowhere to be seen, having evidently made a swift and cowardly exit. "Bella! Don't do this!" Richard shouted, his voice cracking with desperation as he started to push his way through the stunned guests. "Let's talk about this in private." "In private?" Isabella laughed, a short, sharp, bitter sound that held no humor. "You mean like you and your mistress were just minutes before you were supposed to pledge your life to me, to our child?" The word mistress hung in the air, an accusation so vulgar and direct, it shocked the refined crowd into another stunned silence. The word child was a second blow, twisting the knife of betrayal. Everyone knew she was pregnant. The crime was now doubled a sin against both a wife and a mother. Her eyes found Richard in the crowd. He froze, his face a mess of guilt and terror. "I believe the woman's name is Scarlett Dubois," Isabella announced, her voice precise and unforgiving. "She's a junior analyst at Sterling Holdings. For those of you on the board, you might want to review your company's policies on fraternization, especially when it involves the CEO-to-be actively cheating on his pregnant fiancée during his own wedding." Every detail was a nail in the coffin. She wasn't just airing dirty laundry. She was meticulously documenting the crime for the whole world to see. She named the woman, her position, the company, the location, the timing. It was a masterclass in controlled demolition. Richard looked utterly broken, exposed. He looked to his mother for help, but Victoria was staring at him with a look of pure, unadulterated fury. He had not just embarrassed the family. He had single-handedly torpedoed her life's work, the merger in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. He had proven himself to be exactly what she feared most, a weak, foolish boy ruled by his basest impulses. Isabella's gaze softened for a fraction of a second as she looked at her own family. Her father's face was a canvas of shock and dawning rage. Her mother was weeping silently. And Leo was looking at her with an expression of fierce, absolute pride. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "I've got you." She turned back to the crowd. "I apologize for wasting your time," she said, her formal tone returning. "But I believe in transparency, and I will not begin a marriage, a family, or a business partnership based on a foundation of such profound disrespect and deceit." She placed the microphone carefully back on the stand. The silence was broken by the sound of her footsteps on the stone path as she walked back the way she came. It was the most powerful walk of her life. She didn't run. She didn't stumble. She moved with the grace and dignity of a queen abdicating a throne she had just discovered was made of filth. As she reached the archway, she unclasped the sterling diamond, the ridiculously large engagement ring Richard had given her. It felt cold and foreign on her finger. She held it out to Leo as he met her. "See that our lawyers get this back to them," she said, her voice a low murmur, "along with a bill for half of this catastrophe." Leo took the ring, his hand closing over it. "Consider it done." "What now?" "Now," Isabella said, taking her brother's arm and not looking back at the chaos erupting behind them. "We go home, and then we go to war." The fairy tale was over. The carefully constructed facade had been shattered into a million pieces. As the Rossi siblings disappeared into the house, leaving the Sterling Empire to implode in a garden of dying lilies, one thing was clear. This was not an ending. It was a beginning. The beginning of a drama that would make the cancelled wedding look like a minor skirmish in a much larger, more brutal conflict. The sleeping giant of the Rossi family had been awakened and hell hath no fury like a billionaire heiress scorned. The drive from the Long Island estate back to Isabella's Manhattan penthouse was a study in surreal silence. Leo drove the black Maybach with a focused intensity navigating the traffic as if it were a hostile battleground. Isabella sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the blur of the city, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. The adrenaline of the confrontation had begun to fade, leaving behind a deep, hollow ache that settled in her bones. She wasn't crying. The betrayal felt too vast, too seismic for tears. It was a tectonic shift in the landscape of her life, and she was still surveying the wreckage. Her phone, which she'd left in the bridal suite, had been retrieved by Leo's security detail. When they finally entered the quiet, sun-drenched expanse of her penthouse overlooking Central Park, her head of security, a stoic ex-Mossad agent named Gabriel, handed it to her. "It hasn't stopped, Miss Rosie," he said, his voice impassive. "We've identified 37 unique numbers from the Sterling family and their associates, and over 200 calls from blocked numbers we assume are media." "Turn it off," Leo commanded. "Bella doesn't need to hear from any of them." "No," Isabella said, her voice surprisingly firm. She took the phone. "I want to see the groveling." She powered it on. The device vibrated violently in her hand as a tsunami of notifications flooded the screen. Voicemails, text messages, missed calls. Most were from Richard. She clicked on the most recent voicemail, putting it on speaker. Richard's voice, thick with manufactured tears and genuine panic, filled the room. "Bella. My God. Bella, I am so sorry. You don't understand. It was a mistake. A stupid, meaningless mistake. She means nothing to me. It was Marcus. He kept pouring me drinks, saying I was nervous. Scarlett was just there. I don't even know how it happened. Please just talk to me. We can fix this. I love you. I love our baby. Don't throw this all away because of one moment of insanity." Isabella listened with a detached curiosity, as if studying a particularly loathsome insect under a microscope. "He blames Marcus. He blames the alcohol. He calls her meaningless. He hasn't taken one shred of responsibility." She observed, her voice clinical. She deleted the voicemail without a second thought. The next was from Victoria. Her tone was not apologetic. It was furious. "Isabella, you have made a catastrophic error in judgment. Whatever foolishness Richard engaged in it was a private matter. To detonate it publicly, to jeopardize a multi-billion-dollar merger out of pure emotional hysterics, is unforgivable. You have proven yourself to be exactly the kind of liability I feared. Call me back when you have decided to act like an adult and salvage this situation, not for Richard's sake, but for the sake of our shareholders." Leo let out a short, harsh laugh. "She's worried about the shareholders, of course. Her son humiliates you in the worst possible way, and her first thought is the stock price." "It's all she knows," Isabella said, deleting Victoria's message as well. She scrolled through the texts. Pathetic apologies from Richard. Demands from his father. Even a bizarrely threatening message from an unknown number that read, "You just made a very powerful enemy, you little bitch." She suspected it was Marcus Thorne. She tossed the phone onto the marble island in her kitchen. "Lawyers," she said to Leo, "get our legal team on a conference call. I want the merger dissolution papers drafted by Monday. I want a press release from Rossi Lifestyle by noon tomorrow, stating our position clearly. I want our PR team to get ahead of this narrative. I am not the hysterical woman. I am the CEO who uncovered a fatal flaw in a potential partner's leadership and acted decisively to protect my company's interests." Leo was already on his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. Done. I'm calling Marco, then Julia from P. What about the personal side? Personal side, Isabella repeated the words as if they were from a foreign language. There is no personal side anymore. He made it business when he cheated with a company employee. He made it business when he risked our family's name. Victoria made it business when she called me a liability pool. The next 48 hours were a blur of calculated strategic warfare. While the Sterlings were in panicked damage control, fielding calls from irate board members and trying to spin a narrative of a troubled emotional bride, the Rossi team launched a surgical PR strike. Their press release was a masterpiece of corporate speak, framing the cancelled wedding and merger as a fundamental divergence in corporate ethics and leadership values discovered at a critical juncture. It never mentioned cheating, but the implication was clear. They were the stable, honorable party, extricating themselves from a toxic partner. The media, smelling blood, went into a frenzy. Paparazzi camped outside Isabella's building and the Sterling Holdings headquarters. Gossip sites published grainy photos of Scarlett Dubois fleeing the wedding venue, her face hidden in shame. Her identity, her job, her social media profiles, everything was dug up and put on public display. She became the digital Scarlet woman torn apart by an anonymous online mob. Isabella felt a flicker of pity for her, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of Scarlett's defiant smirk in that study. Meanwhile, Leo was dismantling the financial ties that had already begun to bind the two companies. He was ruthless. Joint accounts were frozen. Preliminary integration budgets were clawed back. A penalty clause in the initial merger agreement, one Leo himself had insisted upon covering, breaches of good faith and personal conduct by key principals was invoked. It would cost Sterling Holdings hundreds of millions of dollars. Isabella spent most of her time in her penthouse, a gilded fortress against the storm outside. Her mother Sophia had arrived, bringing with her the scent of home-cooked food and unconditional love. She didn't offer advice or judgment. She simply sat with Isabella, held her hand, and let her be silent when she needed silence and rage when she needed to rage. The rage came on the third day. Isabella was standing in the nursery she had so lovingly designed. It was a serene space of soft creams and gentle greys, with a hand-painted mural of a whimsical forest on one wall. A tiny crib stood assembled in the corner. She ran her hand over the smooth wood, and suddenly the full weight of her loss crashed down on her. It wasn't just the loss of a husband, but the loss of a dream of the family she thought she was building for her child. She let out a guttural sob, a sound of pure animal pain. And then she began to dismantle the room. She didn't break anything. Her actions were deliberate, methodical. She folded the tiny clothes and placed them back in their boxes. She took down the mobile of soft felted stars. She pushed the crib against the wall. She was erasing Richard, erasing the future they were supposed to have, clearing the space for a new one she would have to build alone. Later that evening, Leo came to her apartment. He found her in the now barren nursery, sitting in the rocking chair, staring at the blank space where the crib had been. "The market's open today," he said, softly, leaning against the doorframe. Isabella didn't turn. "How bad was it?" "Worse than we thought." "For them," Leo clarified. Sterling Holdings dropped 17% at the opening bell. The financial press is calling it the Sterling implosion. Our stock, on the other hand, is up 3%. The narrative is holding we're seen as the strong, stable ones who dodged a bullet. A grim satisfaction settled over her. Good. There's more, Leo said, his tone shifting. Something's not right. The penalty clause I invoked. Sterling's lawyers are fighting it, which is expected. But their arguments are weak, almost distracted. And I've been looking at some of the preliminary financial data we shared during the due diligence phase. There are anomalies. This caught Isabella's attention. She turned to look at her brother. What kind of anomalies? Small things. Discrepancies in growth projections for certain offshore assets. A few encrypted data packets that our tech team flagged as unusual during the transfer. At the time, we chalked it up to Sterling's sloppy data management. But now, I don't know. It feels different. He walked further into the room. Think about it, Bella. The affair was stupid. It was arrogant. But the timing, on the morning of the wedding at the venue itself, it's almost too perfect, too self-destructive. Richard is weak and entitled, but is he suicidal? A new thought, cold and sharp, cut through Isabella's grief. Leo was right. The sheer brazen stupidity of Richard's actions was hard to reconcile. It was a level of recklessness that bordered on the theatrical. "What are you suggesting?" she asked. "I'm suggesting," Leo said, his eyes narrowing, "that maybe the affair wasn't the main event. Maybe it was a distraction, a smokescreen designed to cause exactly this kind of chaos. The question is, what was it meant to hide? The world, which had just been shattered, shifted again. Isabella had thought she was at the center of a drama about love and betrayal, but the cold dread creeping into her heart suggested she had been a pawn in an entirely different game. One with stakes that might be far higher than a broken heart and a cancelled wedding. The unraveling, she realized, had only just begun. The seed of doubt Leo had planted grew into a thicket of suspicion in Isabella's mind. For the next 2 weeks, while the world feasted on the scraps of her personal drama, she and her brother initiated a covert operation. They assembled a small, trusted team, Marco, their head of legal, Julia, their PR chief, a forensic accountant named Anya Sharma, who had a reputation for finding needles in digital haystacks, and Gabriel, their head of security, who was tasked with digging into the lives of Richard Marcus Thorne and Scarlett Dubois. Isabella worked from her penthouse, which had been transformed into a war room. The large dining table was covered in laptops, financial reports, and timelines. The grief was still there, a constant, dull ache, but it was now overlaid with a cold, energizing fury. She had been played. Her pain, her humiliation, her child's future, it had all been collateral damage in a game she didn't even know she was playing. Now she wanted to know the rules, and she wanted to burn the whole game board to the ground. Anya Sharma struck first. "The anomalies Leo flagged are real," she announced during a late-night conference call, her voice crisp and excited. "During the due diligence data transfer, Sterling Holdings sent us several large encrypted archive files containing their projections and asset valuations. Standard procedure. But buried within 3 of those archives were ghost protocols, essentially hidden programs that ran in the background while our servers were analyzing the data." "What did the programs do?" Isabella asked, leaning forward, her coffee forgotten. "They didn't steal anything," Anya said. "That would have triggered alarms. They did something much smarter. They made micro-alterations to our own predictive models. Tiny, insignificant changes to algorithm variables that over time would have skewed our valuation of their assets, specifically their new tech and derivatives divisions, making them appear more stable and profitable than they actually were." Leo swore softly in Italian. "So they weren't just showing us fake numbers. They were hacking us to make us believe their fake numbers were our own idea." "Exactly," Anya confirmed. "It's brilliant and terrifyingly subtle. The financial discrepancy would have been a rounding error at first, but post-merger it would have become a black hole. Sterling Rossi Global would have been carrying billions in toxic, overvalued assets from their side of the ledger. Within a year or two, it would have triggered a catastrophic devaluation. A corporate Trojan horse, Isabella whispered, the pieces beginning to click into place. Victoria would never sanction that. She's ruthless, but she's not stupid. A collapse like that would destroy the Sterling name forever. Which means someone else at Sterling Holdings was running this play. Leo concluded, his voice grim. Someone who stood to gain from the chaos. The spotlight fell squarely on two people, Richard and Marcus Thorne. At the same time, Gabriel's report landed on Isabella's desk. It was a deep dive into the lives of her ex-fiancé and his best man. Richard's profile was predictable, a history of lavish spending, a string of short-term relationships with models and actresses, and a deep-seated psychological need for his mother's approval. But Marcus Thorne's profile was far more interesting. On the surface, he was the loyal number 2. But Gabriel's team had dug deeper. Marcus came from a family that had been rivals with the Sterlings 2 generations ago, before his own family's fortune had collapsed. He had joined Sterling Holdings with a chip on his shoulder, working his way up while living in Richard's shadow. Gabriel had also uncovered a series of encrypted communications and offshore bank transfers. Marcus was living far beyond his declared salary, and the money trail led to a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands. The final piece of the puzzle was Scarlett Dubois. Gabriel's team found that she wasn't just a random ambitious analyst. Her university tuition had been paid for by an anonymous scholarship fund. A fund that Gabriel, through painstaking digital forensics, traced back to the same Cayman Islands holding company that was financing Marcus Thorne. He's been cultivating her for years, Isabella breathed, staring at the interconnected lines she had drawn on a whiteboard. She was his asset. He placed her inside the company, probably instructed her to get close to Richard, knowing Richard's weakness for a pretty face and a bit of ego stroking. It's a classic intelligence operation, Gabriel stated. Thorne is the handler, Dubois is the honey trap. The full horrifying picture began to emerge. This was Marcus Thorne's endgame. He wasn't Richard's friend. He was his nemesis, playing a long, patient game of revenge and ambition. So here's the play, Leo said, pacing the room, piecing it together. Marcus plants the Trojan horse in the merger data. He knows it will eventually cripple the new company, but that's not enough. He wants to take over. He needs to discredit the Sterling leadership, namely Richard, and cause a crisis that sends the stock price plummeting. The affair, Isabella finished, her voice laced with ice. It was the perfect catalyst. He goads Richard, who is already a willing fool, into a situation he knows Richard can't resist. He makes sure it happens at the most public, most damaging time possible. He wanted me to find them. He wanted the public explosion. It wasn't just about stopping the merger. It was about cratering Sterling Holdings' value. So he could trigger a hostile takeover, Anya added. With the stock in freefall, the company would be vulnerable. He and his backers, whoever is behind that Cayman account, could swoop in and buy up a controlling interest for pennies on the dollar. He gets his revenge on the Sterlings. He gets the company, and he gets to be the hero who rescues it from the ashes. Leo summarized, shaking his head in disbelief at the sheer Machiavellian audacity of the plan. It was all there. The cheating scandal wasn't the story. It was the cover. Isabella's public humiliation had been a meticulously planned strategic move in a corporate coup. The realization didn't lessen her pain, but it transformed it. The grief of a victim was replaced by the cold, calculating rage of a queen who had been used as a pawn in a commoner's coup. "Richard," Isabella said the name, testing it. "Where does he fit? Is he a total idiot, or was he a willing participant?" "I think he's a fool, not a conspirator," Leo reasoned. "Marcus likely sold him a different story. Sow some wild oats before you settle down. Have one last fling." He played on Richard's ego and insecurities. Richard thought he was just being a playboy. He had no idea he was the sacrificial lamb. Isabella stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city lights. They seemed sharper now, colder. She had been betrayed on a level she could scarcely comprehend. Her heart had been broken to create a market opportunity. "They underestimated me," she said, softly, her reflection staring back at her from the dark glass. "They all did. Richard thought I was just a prize. Victoria thought I was an asset. And Marcus thought I was a hysterical woman who would just cry and cancel a wedding." She turned back to the room, her eyes burning with a new fire. "He's right about one thing. I did cancel the wedding. Now I'm going to cancel his entire future." She looked at Leo, at Anya, at Gabriel. "We have the proof of the financial fraud. We have the connection between Marcus and Scarlett. We have the motive. It's time to stop playing defense. It's time to show them what a Rossi does when you threaten our family and our house." The serpent had played his game, but he had made a fatal error. He had attacked the lioness in her own den, and he had forgotten that she had claws of her own. The war for Sterling Holdings was about to enter a new bloody chapter, and Isabella Rossi, the scorned bride, was about to become its unlikely conqueror. Isabella did not move with the speed of a woman seeking vengeance. She moved with the cold, deliberate precision of a master chess player setting up a checkmate. For a week, she did nothing, letting the public narrative solidify. Sterling Holdings continued its slow-motion collapse. The stock had stabilized, but was still down almost 30% from its pre-wedding value. Board members were in open revolt, and Victoria Sterling was fighting a losing battle to maintain control her every move, hampered by the public disgrace of her son. Marcus Thorne, meanwhile, was playing his part perfectly. He was the picture of loyalty, publicly defending the Sterling family, while privately telling key investors and board members that Richard was an unstable liability, and Victoria had lost her touch. He was positioning himself as the only viable successor, the steady hand needed to guide the company through the storm he had created. The first move of Isabella's counterattack was silent and devastating. Through a neutral third-party law firm based in Geneva, Leo, acting on Isabella's instructions, forwarded Anya Sharma's entire forensic report on the Trojan Horse data breach to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Department of Justice. The report was submitted anonymously, flagged as a whistleblower complaint originating from within Sterling Holdings itself. It detailed the attempted fraud, the ghost protocols, and the potential for massive shareholder deception without once mentioning the Rossi family. 2 days later, federal agents walked into the Sterling Holdings headquarters in Midtown with a warrant. They seized servers, computers, and files. The raid made national news, sending a fresh shockwave of panic through the investment community. The stock, which had been limping, now nosedived into a catastrophic freefall. The narrative was no longer about a cheating fiancé. It was about systemic, high-level corporate fraud. Victoria and Richard were blindsided. They had been so focused on the personal scandal that they had no idea a financial guillotine was hanging over their heads. Isabella's second move was targeted at Marcus Thorne himself. While the federal investigation paralyzed the company, Gabriel delivered a dossier to her. It contained irrefutable proof of the offshore account, the payments to Scarlett Dubois, and the crown jewel, a secretly recorded audio file. Gabriel's team had managed to recover a conversation between Marcus and one of his co-conspirators, a disgruntled board member from a cloud backup. In the recording, Marcus laid out his entire plan. The sabotage of the merger, the use of the affair to spook the filly, his disgusting term for Isabella, and his strategy to trigger a hostile takeover using funds from their Cayman Islands entity. Isabella didn't leak the audio. That would be too simple, too chaotic. She decided to deliver the blow herself. She requested a meeting with the Sterling Holdings Board of Directors. The request, coming from the woman at the center of their company's downfall, was met with stunned confusion. But her family was still a major player in the global market, and refusing her would look weak. They agreed, holding the meeting in their cavernous, wood-paneled boardroom, the very heart of the Sterling Empire. Isabella walked into that room, not as a victim, but as a conqueror. She was dressed in a sharply tailored crimson suit, the color of power and blood. She was visibly pregnant, a silent testament to the personal cost of the drama, but her demeanor was pure steel. Leo was by her side, his presence a silent warning. Victoria Richard and the entire board, including a smug-looking Marcus Thorne, were seated around the massive table. Victoria's face was a mask of cold fury. Richard couldn't even look at her. He stared at the table, a broken man. "Thank you for seeing me." Isabella began, her voice calm and clear, filling the tense silence. "I know my presence here is unexpected. I am not here to relitigate the personal events of the past few weeks. I am here to talk about the future of this company." "You have no right to be here," Victoria snapped. "You have done enough damage." "On the contrary," Isabella replied, her eyes locking with Victoria's. "I am here because I am the only person in this room who knows the full truth of why your company is burning to the ground, and it has very little to do with my cancelled wedding." She looked directly at Marcus Thorne, whose smug expression was beginning to falter, replaced by a flicker of alarm. "For weeks you have all been operating under the assumption that this crisis was caused by a personal indiscretion. You are wrong. The affair was merely a tool, a brightly colored flag waved to distract the bull while the matador prepared the killing blow." She nodded to Leo, who placed a small, sleek speaker on the center of the table. "I believe you all know Marcus Thorne," Isabella said, her voice dropping. "You see him as Richard's loyal right hand, the future of this company, perhaps. But I'd like to introduce you to the real Marcus Thorne." She pressed play. Marcus's voice filled the boardroom, arrogant and chillingly clear. "The beauty of it is the simplicity. We let pretty boy Richard hang himself with his own zipper. The girl Scarlett played her part perfectly. The pregnant fiancés, the filly spooks, just like I said she would. She cancels everything, makes a big dramatic scene. The stock tanks on the personal drama. Then while they're all running around putting out that fire, the feds get the anonymous tip about the merger data. By the time they figure out what's really going on, we've already bought up 30% of the stock from the Caymans. We rescue the company. I take the throne. The Sterlings are history." The silence that followed the recording was heavier than a tombstone. Every eye in the room turned to Marcus Thorne. His face was the color of ash. He half rose from his chair, sputtering, trying to form a denial, but no words came. He was utterly, completely exposed. Victoria Sterling looked as if she had been turned to stone. The betrayal from her son was one thing, but this was a viper she had nurtured in her own nest, a man who had plotted the utter destruction of her life's work, while smiling to her face. Isabella pressed a second button, and an email was sent simultaneously to everyone in the room. That is the audio file. You will also now have a full dossier detailing Mr. Thorne's offshore accounts, his conspiracy with certain members of this board, and his long-term cultivation of Scarlett Dubois as a corporate espionage asset. I have taken the liberty of forwarding this entire package to the lead investigator at the SEC. I believe they will find it very illuminating. Marcus Thorne sank back into his chair, a dead man walking. His career was over. His freedom was next. Isabella finally allowed her gaze to fall upon Richard. He was staring at her, his eyes filled with a desperate, pathetic plea for a forgiveness he would never receive. He finally understood that he had not been a player, but a pawn. He had lost everything: his fiancée, his child, his company, his family's respect. Not for a passionate mistake, but as a calculated move in someone else's game. It was a truth more damning than any affair. As of this morning, Isabella announced, her voice ringing with finality, Rossi Lifestyle, through a subsidiary investment fund, has acquired a 28% stake in Sterling Holdings, purchased on the open market at its current distressed value. We are now the single largest shareholder. She let that bombshell settle. She owned them. We will be calling for an emergency shareholder meeting to remove the current board and install new leadership. My brother Leo Rossi will act as interim chairman. We will cooperate fully with the federal investigation. We will rebuild this company based on the Rossi values: integrity, transparency, and strength. She stood up. Her point made her victory absolute. She had not just weathered the storm. She had harnessed its power and used it to conquer her enemies. She walked toward the door, pausing only when she was level with Richard. She looked at him, not with hatred, but with a final dismissive indifference. "You were right about one thing, Richard," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It was a meaningless mistake. You are a meaningless man." With that, she turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind the smoldering ruins of the Sterling dynasty. She stepped out into the bright Manhattan sunshine, took a deep breath of the free air, and placed a hand on her stomach. The baby kicked a steady, strong rhythm. It was a new world, a new future. One she had secured not as a bride, but as a warrior. A queen who had faced down betrayal and built an empire from the ashes. And so the fairy tale wedding ended not with a kiss, but with a hostile takeover. Isabella Rossi walked away from the wreckage, not as a heartbroken victim, but as a triumphant queen who had turned the deepest betrayal of her life into her greatest victory. She proved that the strongest empires aren't built on contracts and mergers, but on unbreakable integrity and the fierce, unyielding power of a woman determined to protect her own. Her story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the most devastating endings are merely the foundation for glorious new beginnings. What would you have done in Isabella's shoes? Could you find the strength to not only walk away, but to fight back and win? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of resilience, justice, and ultimate empowerment resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Thank you for listening.